We good? Uh, it's like Drew. Nobody wants to hear about that. Hurry up, go to the stuff. Um, so, so yeah, just really wanted to give a shout out to Dr. May Abrams because yeah, this isn't here without her. So if you really like what you learn here tonight, or you find some of this really significant, feel free to send her love letters. She's still at Rowan doing her thing. Tell her how awesome Brainjacked was, and thank her. But if you think it's terrible and it's dumb, then that's my fault. So you can blame me. So don't send her those letters. All right, cool. So there's the origins, and yeah, since then that was 10 years ago. Addiction-related research funding and neuroscience studies have continued to increase, which is super cool. Which has also increased our understanding of addiction and its biological rooting, right? Its biological basis. So yeah, the days of like addiction is because you're a bad person or a moral failure, like those are pretty much over. I mean, there's still pockets of ignorance or unawareness or uneducation, but what's cool, organizations like Mobilize Recovery and folks everywhere that are living recovery, like we're spreading more and more of this kind of information and awareness, which is super awesome. Um, yeah, and not only do we know now that like the brain has something to do with addiction, but we also have a much more yeah, nuanced and complete understanding or detailed understanding of what's going on where, right? How parts are interacting. And that'll be some of the presentation here today too. So it's cool to not only like come out of the Stone Age as far as understanding what addiction actually is, to then being able to really understand the nuanced parts, because the more we know, right, or when we know better, we do better, right? So, the more information that we have, then the easier it is to then move effectively and with impact. So, yeah, cool. All right, I have all my like spicy stuff. I might snap fingers and pop and whatever. My days of masking are over, so you just get me. Um, I guess that's a disclaimer too. But yeah, a couple disclaimers. So beware, there's science involved here. I know that science has become apparently less popular in some places, um, recently, if you will. But there's science here, and so if things, yeah, if you're not a, oh, oh, that's cool. You can do art on there. That's neat. Um, anywho, yeah, there's some ADHD stuff too. But yeah, beware of science. This is a science thing. If your like view or take on reality is not as science based, that's cool. This is probably this is an interesting presentation to attend. If that's the case, but yeah, I mean the cool thing about science is that it potentially gives us insight and awareness into things that we might not arrive at on our own, and also sometimes some of the things that we're learning, um, yeah, might be at odds with or challenge what we already think we know. So if that happens, cool. That's the process of learning, right? Is moving from a comfort zone into a more expanded state, if you will. So science is here, and I tried to keep the entire presentation rooted in neuroscience, so it doesn't veer into opinion or yeah. It's either neuroscience here or psychological research. So, which I mean, that isn't like the whole truth. Like there's things beyond science or whatever, but this presentation is very much rooted in science. So put that out there. And then the other disclaimer too, before I jump in, is yeah. So like the first four or five times we did this without fail, at some point somebody like raised a hand because it was all in person then. Somebody raised a hand and then went on like a 5-minute rant about, I mean, like sharing what they know or what they think they know about some neuroscience thing. And and if you know stuff about neuroscience and addiction, that's awesome. You've already met Aaron. I would suggest that you connect with Aaron, and maybe at some point in the future, you can also do a presentation. Um, but for this particular presentation, to kind of keep it online, yeah, I'll just ask that, there's no need to tell us everything you think you know, or like tell us how your organization or treatment center like does neurosciencey things. Like no marketing necessary. Um, Yeah. And hopefully that doesn't come across like a jerk, but whatever, it is what it is. And like I said, my past experience created the need to kind of like request that nicely. But questions are definitely welcome, and I'll chat about that here in a second. All right. Goal of presentation though, yeah, keeping the main thing the main thing. Matthew's doing lots of art. Can anybody else see the art that Matthew's doing on the screen? There's like X's and lines. I bet you it's like somebody's kid is like clicking buttons. So weird. That's not showing up for y'all? No? All right. Yeah, the goal of presentation, right? Increase under awareness and understanding, and and then that reduces stigma, and then that gives us a more informed approach to then potentially be more effective in supporting folks, treating folks who are struggling with addiction and all of the related stuff. So that's the ultimate goal here, and also to increase sanity. It's nice when when we're a little more sane, right? And working in addiction treatment or supporting folks that are dealing with addiction professionally or personally, or dealing with it on your own. Yeah, like there's lots of opportunities for insanity. And so hopefully some of what is shared here is in the direction of sane. Yeah, I won't claim actual sanity. Well, I don't know, it's a Thursday, and I'm feeling kind of sane. So sanity, yeah, awareness, understanding, reducing stigma. That's the jam here. All right, feels good. Take a deep breath, and we'll get on with the show. So there'll be three parts of the presentation: hijacked, habituated, and healing. This is a little bit new of an organization, but I spent the last week with all this stuff, so this is the way it kind of fell through or came through. And yeah, and there's a lot of information included in this presentation in these slides. I'm going to be really impressed with myself if I get this in under $130, with pockets for questions and stuff. But the cool part is, with all this info, definitely pace yourself, like in this experience, because this is recorded. You'll have access to it later. Also, I'll give you guys access to the slides itself. So you're going to have this experience for the next 90 minutes or so. But yeah, you can come back to this as often as you want through the slides and the recording. So don't feel like you need to gobble all of the information here completely this time, because there's a lot. So if you need a nap, give yourself permission to just fall down, or take a yawn, or go outside for 5 minutes. And there'll be break slides too. I have two tiny intermissions. So if you need to run to the bathroom, or just yawn, or not listen to Drew talk for like 2 minutes, that'll be provided. All right. Oh, and then yeah, questions are welcome. Like I said, I would request that the questions are more clarification purposes for the content that is included here in the presentation, right? So again, if you have a question and it's a 4-minute preface and then you go off in a different direction, I might kind of bring you back. Or we could chat later. Like I'm around, I'm available. So if there's like new conversations, that can happen. I might curb that a little bit just to stay within the time constraints here. Because I don't think, Aaron, you correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think anytime we did Brainjacked, we landed in under 90 minutes. But I'm going to do my best. And also it's a little bit easier because I'm just sitting alone in in my apartment. I'm not like actually interactive with people, because then I'm all over the place. It's also weird doing this being the straight guy. Like in the past, it was always me and Lisa. And so Lisa was like the straight woman who was like on task. And then I could just ADHD and tangent all over the place. And so now I'm like carrying both roles, which, I have multiple personalities, so it'll work out. But anywho, all right, on with the show. Let's go. Part 1 is hijack. All right, gotta take a deep breath. That's good. I practiced this, but like Aaron said, it's different every time. Ooh, there's like a lightning storm going on outside. Anyway, all right. So the first thing that I want to do here in part 1 is reintroduce dopamine. So yeah, I guess we'll do it like this. Like hit the little hand signal thingy. Like there's a hand thing that you can click to participate. Aaron's got everybody muted. because that just makes life way easier. But this would be cool to have a little feedback. Um, when I say dopamine, you say, like what have you heard of when it comes to dopamine? Because there's some misconceptions out there. So yeah, I'm looking for people to respond. Can we do that? Is that possible?
Yeah, if you can use the raise hand function, if you
That
want
thing.
to ask a
There you go.
question or chime in, and we'll just take you off of mute.
Yeah, there we go.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Oh, so then I click unmute. Boop and boop. Yeah, and just jump in, like play popcorn with it.
It's the feel good chemical.
Yep.
You win a
That's
prize,
what they said.
whatever. It's the feel good chemical.
All right, cool. That I've heard that too. Other stuffs. Anybody else?
Yeah,
No, maybe.
a
All
few
right.
other, we had a few other hand raises, and then they went
Or
down.
that.
There you go.
Yeah. I mean
Here's
that might
Michael.
have been the most common response.
Here's Michael.
Yeah, Mike.
Neurotransmitter tied to the reward system in the brain.
Oh, somebody been doing the homework. Very cool. All right. I mean that's cool. That's good. Um, yeah. So most of the time, so dopamine is a neurotransmitter. And most of the time when we hear about dopamine, we think, oh, it's the feel good, it's the happy juice, right? It's the pleasure center. Um, and that is not totally accurate, actually, right? So thanks to the, continuing neuroscience, we've been able to understand the function of dopamine, and see what it really does, right? So rather than dopamine being like feel good or making you feel happy, like feel goods and happies, there's a little bit of that to dopamine, but then there's also other stuff like endogenous opioids and endocannabinoids, right? Like different $20 words for the inside happy juices. But what dopamine really, really does is it marks importance, right? So when dopamine shows up, it's not to make you feel good. I mean, it does that a little bit, but really part of making you feel good, it's about letting you know like the thing you're doing is important for survival. So as a human being, like to survive, it's pretty cool that our brain naturally makes us feel good about doing things that are important for survival, right? And that's what dopamine does. It tags things as important, and then it also gives a little boost of like a performance boost to the part of the brain that it's in. And I'll go through, how dopamine's released again. But I just wanted to clarify that because it feels important to recognize that in a brain that kind of is in addiction or, a brain that gets brainjacked, it's not just about like feeling good. Like as we're going to see, a brain that's in addiction, it's got like messages that are hitting wrong, right? And so really when dopamine's flooding, it's actually telling the brain that something that's happening, like the drug, is essential for survival. And so then that's why it really kind of messes with our priorities and how we show up in our life. So addiction isn't just about chasing the feel good, right? It's very much about like how the brain's own firing and communication gets a little wonky. So cool. So hopefully that's cool and clear. Yeah, and the image that came to mind when I was thinking about dopamine, so as far as marking importance, like it's a highlighter, right? So it highlights a particular situation, a particular event, right? As like, hey, this is important, pay attention here. And then it gives you a little boost, right? So like a cup of coffee. So that part of the brain actually starts to like perform at a higher level. It's on its A game now, right? When a little bit of dopamine's in there. It's like a little shot of espresso. Yeah, maybe some people. I try to mix in like multi-generational references, but but then I also feel old when I put Sabrina Carpenter on the slide. But anywho, yeah, so dopamine, it marks importance and it gives you a little boost of performance in that particular area of the brain. And dopamine works with, a variety of areas. But for this presentation, we're going to talk mostly about the reward system, as Michael mentioned earlier. Yeah, my favorite term is it's like survival juice. Like dopamine is what keeps us alive and evolving and doing things that keep us alive and evolving. And then I'm using these different color coded smiley faces, which will make sense later. I was going to use like a dopey, but I feel like dopey's vibe is not congruent with dopamine. So, anywho, all right. So that's dopamine. That's the first thing we're going to introduce, and then yeah, and then we'll talk a little bit about the usual suspects or the three parts of the brain, the three main parts of the brain that we'll talk about here in the beginning. So the ventral tegmental area, the VTA, is the little pink button in the picture at the bottom. And I'm going to give you a visual thing after this too. So I just want to introduce you to the areas first. So the VTA, not to be confused with the TVA for you Marvel folks, right? But maybe it's a cool association. The VTA is where dopamine is produced. So this is the dopamine factory. I mean, there's a couple other spots in the brain where it's produced, but the VTA is one of the main centers of producing dopamine. Right. So that's in the equation here. And then there is the nucleus accumbens, which is the little green thing in the picture, and that's your motivation and drive center. So in the nucleus accumbens, the stuff the brain's doing there is related to motivation, also some survival. Like the nucleus accumbens helps you drink when you're thirsty, eat when you're hungry, right? Like it's very much connected to what we're doing and the reinforcement that's involved. And so then the VTA and the nucleus accumbens, they talk, and yeah, dopamine essentially goes to the nucleus accumbens to support things that are cool for our survival. Sweet. And I'm going to run through this a couple different times. So if it doesn't land right away, that's okay. Yeah, just keep rolling with me. And then the third part is the prefrontal cortex, which is stuff in the front of your brain. It's the thing. Yeah, it's like the latest adaptation to the brain in the history of braining. And that's responsible for decision making, regulating your behaviors, emotions, right? How you show up, planning, right? Like executive function. So these are your three main areas we're going to talk about for the presentation. Cool. So weird to just be sitting here staring at the screen and not like interacting with people. Anywho. All right. So yeah, I told you I was going to give you visual, so let's do that. So the little pink button, little pink bean there, that is the VTA. That's where the dopamine is produced. And then the green spot is the nucleus accumbens. That's your motivation and drive center. That's what helps you, yeah, like do things that keep you alive and yeah, make life cool, right? Like if you're like chasing some kind of accomplishment and then getting a reward from it, that's all happening here in this system here. And ultimately, right, survival is the goal of the reward system. It's not to make you feel good or give you a shiny gold star or nothing, right? Like on the evolutionary brain level, these two areas are talking, this reward system is happening in order to reinforce behaviors that are good for your survival. And that's also not just like food and water and procreation, but also, yeah, like accomplishments and connection, right? Like all the things that make life cool and awesome and worth living. The nucleus accumbens, right, and the VTA are working together on reinforcing those behaviors. And again, if you remember the dopamine that's being released from the nucleus accumbens, that's tagging things as important. So whenever you do something that's cool for survival, there's a little bit of like maybe happiness that comes with something, but the dopamine that's released is what reinforces it and saying, hey, this is important. Take a look at this. Do this more. All right, cool. And this reward system is what has taken us from, our early days to our most modern evolution. So from a caveman, creating fire to staring at our phone for 12 hours a day. It is what it is. But I mean, the phone is a pretty cool contraption. Anywho, yeah, the reward system is responsible for us continuing to be alive and survive. And so that's why addiction is so nasty, is because essentially with the way the hijack happens, it's a natural system that has kept us alive that now is going haywire and has been hijacked that, then potentially is leading us to dangerous or lethal decisions. So it's deep brain communication that's going on. It's not like just somebody says, "Oh, let's do drugs," and who cares what anybody, feels about it. It's much, much deeper than that. So hopefully that continues to come through in the presentation here, or supports what you already know. All right, in a healthy reward system, we'll run through the example just to, again, have a little bit of an understanding what's going on here. So say there's a delicious snack, and I don't mean the cutie at the coffee shop. I mean, at the coffee shop. All right, I'm talking about a snack like an actual, like a pastry or, something like that, whatever your jam is, right? So if you take a bite of your snack and it's delicious, it tastes really good, right? You're gonna have some natural feel goods there, right? Just because it tastes good. And yeah, and then essentially by taking that bite and it tastes good, that experience, then the brain's like, oh, this is cool. We like this. This is good for survival. Let's give a little dopamine to the nucleus accumbens, because that's in charge of like choosing our behaviors and what we do. Right. So we get a little bit of dopamine that goes with a little bit of happy with this snack. And this is our natural reward system. Right. When the nucleus accumbens lights up, that's that NAC. Yeah, essentially it's getting lit up with dopamine, right? The dopamine's coming in, lighting it up, and it's saying, hey, this is important. This is cool. Let's do this again. This is good for survival. Like this snack is delicious. Right? And then you have your prefrontal cortex, which is kind of like the supervisor, right? And so it's like, oh yeah, this is cool. But maybe don't eat all the snacks, right? Like have a snack, but let's make a wise decision, or like that kind of decision making is happening in your prefrontal cortex. So that's all the miraculous stuff your brain is doing while you're just like taking 2 bites of a pastry. Like the brain is so amazing, man. Anywho, another example, as far as doing stuff, right? So you're at work and you're kicking butt and you accomplish a work goal or project goal. That's going to register as cool, right? You're going to get maybe a little bit more satisfaction or happy from that. And the brain is also going to release dopamine in alignment with that, right? So something feels good, you have an accomplishment, great job. And then the brain, right? I mean, the brain doesn't really talk to itself, it just does things, but but like that's kind of the parts of the brain talk to themselves, each other. Anywho, yeah. So you've done something that's cool, right? Like an achievement, and that's good for survival, right? Your social status among your peers. You can really think in like caveman terms about like, because the brain has so many different parts and multiple, like different parts are different ages too. So you have like ancient parts talking to brand new parts. That's part of why the prefrontal cortex, like we can override stuff, but it's like the new kid on the block. So if the prefrontal cortex were to get in an argument with like some of like the reward system's going to win, because that's like the older, it's got more weight in the room, if you will. So maybe that's a metaphor that helps. But yeah, so you do something good for survival. Again, the theme is VTA produces the dopamine in alignment with that natural reward. And that's registered in your system as like, oh, this is cool too. This is good for survival too. We like doing this. Let's do this more. Right? That's another code word that you can associate with dopamine is more. Right? Like do this again. We like this. This is awesome. Keep doing this. Ooh, some wind coming through. And yeah, and then the prefrontal cortex is kind of like, yeah, cool. This is good. Maybe take a break before you start the next like 3-week obsessive working streak, or sometimes yeah, we get something good and then we don't like stop to enjoy it or like stop to like rest. We just go on to the next thing. I mean, I know, yeah, for years workaholic is what replaced alcoholic in my life. So yeah, there was not a lot of the prefrontal cortex being like, okay, Drew, like let's pause before the next thing. All right, there wasn't a conscious decision. It was much more the system still firing in a way that was addictive, right? So, all right, so hopefully these make sense. And again, if you have questions or if I sped through something or something didn't totally make sense to you, do the hand thingamajig, and I could come to you. All right, cool. Yeah, because there's a lot going on here, and not all of it comes out of my mouth in a way that's helpful. All right, so there are your examples of healthy reward system. How we doing? Oh, dang. All right. As far as a jacked up reward system, right? So we're talking brain jacked here. So it's the same parts of the brain that are involved, but now because of the substance or the behavior, we're messing with the way the system works. So your dopamine, right? Like, so if you take a drug or you engage in a like a highly stimulating behavior, what it does is it slams the VTA, right? So we go a level 11 now, and it's artificial too. It's not like a natural reward. This is just like a substance goes in, and then the substance's impact on the brain is to flood dopamine. So it's not like you actually did anything cool. I mean, drugs are, cool in some ways, right? They can make you feel good short term. Um, but like that's not what's happening in this part of the brain, right? It's not about like, oh, this feels good. It's literally that the part of the brain that produces the survival reinforcing juice is getting smashed, and then there's a flood that opens up. And there is some euphoria that goes with that, but there's also a ton of craving too. We'll talk about that more as well. Right? Like it's not necessarily satisfaction, it's wanting that really gets triggered when the dopamine dumps into the nucleus accumbens, or when the nucleus accumbens gets lit up like a jackpot slot machine. And I mean, I think it makes sense if we think about it. The nucleus accumbens normally is just regulating like what we want, what we don't want, what's helpful for survival, and then says, hey, this is cool, go get that. That's when it's running on like a little bit, that's the baseline, and then with a little bit of dopamine for natural rewards. Now what we've done is we've flooded it with dopamine, right, by taking the drug. And so the nucleus accumbens now is like level 11, like, so the messaging that's going on there now is like, this is the most important thing ever. This is essential, and we need it all the time, right? So it's like your friend who's like way too excited about something that everyone's like jazzed about, but they're like, you got to be like, hey, do me a favor, sit down, take a deep breath. Um, that's what's happening in the nucleus accumbens, right? And that intensity of wanting is a huge part of like the experience, right, that you have, yeah, in addiction, along with this like super reward sensation. So I'm going to pause because we got a hand. Hey, Kathy.
Hi. So does this flooding happen because they did the drugs, or is it something that's not correct with the brain?
Yep. So what I'm talking about here is the use of the drug, right? So
Okay.
you take a dose of opiates or cocaine, or you engage in a like gambling or any kind of like behavioral addiction.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's what is artificially stimulating the VTA to release a ton of dopamine.
Okay. Okay.
Now, everybody's brain's a little different. So I mean, some people are better at this naturally, and and also it's hard to say what's chicken or the egg sometimes in the
Right.
brain when it comes to addiction, because you can't like ethically look at a bunch of brains and then give half of them addiction to see like what the actual impact is there. But some folks it's the chicken, some folks it's the egg, some folks it's both. As far as like maybe you naturally have dopamine regulation stuff going on, and then
Mhm.
addiction is like a solution there. Or it could be the other way. You could have totally healthy dopamine regulation and flow, and then the use of the drug comes in and whacks things out. So
And
does
does
that make
it,
sense?
yes,
Uh,
totally. Could it permanently damage that flooding effect by,
nothing's nothing's permanent in any
okay,
part of life.
okay.
I
Yay.
mean, like, yeah. Like the brain is miraculous in its ability to, yeah, change and adapt, and our understanding of it has continued to grow. But yeah, nothing's permanent in any part of life, but also when it comes to the brain. You might need, like if you're a couple seasons into rewiring the brain in this way, you might need a couple seasons to rewire, but it's totally possible.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Kat. And then I see you, Jacob. What's going on, man? Oh, you hold on, dog. You're muted. I don't know if I can do that or. Ask to unmute. There we go. We'll try that. Nope. Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
All
All
right.
right.
So this extreme that's happening in the nucleus incumbent and the and the release of the dopamine
Yep.
during the usage of drug intake or alcohol intake.
Mhm.
Does this still happen even in spite of the consequences? So a person starts experiencing
Oh
consequences
yeah.
as a result of this
Mhm.
usage.
Yep.
Is this still going on? This extreme happening in the brain? Is that still the case? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. 1,000%. So consequences is kind of like a prefrontal cortex thing, right? So like little kids can't think about the future, can't think logically. As we mature, the last brain change, which is like late teens to early 20s, is really when the prefrontal cortex comes online. And that's what's in charge of making like responsible adult decisions, like thinking things out. And so consequences is kind of like pain is pain, but then like, hey, I did this, it caused pain, I shouldn't do that. Like that's a really logical decision that some people can make. But when you have this whole part of your brain firing like off track, like that part of the brain wins over your consequence thinking. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. One
Cool.
last question on
Yeah.
that. Um, so am I understanding you correctly, or does this make sense that basically the using sort of people use to sort of cover up so I don't have to face the consequences. I don't deal with the consequences
Oh.
at the time, so I keep using in a
So
way to sort of cover up the consequences.
so that could be like some conscious thought process for maybe some part of the using. But what happens is after we've used for a while, it gets it gets shifted to a different part of the brain that automates it,
Gotcha.
right? So like, we'll talk about that in a little bit too. So in the beginning, it could be like, hey, I don't want to feel this, like for me, like one of the big things early in my active addiction was like a heartbreak, was a breakup, and so like I didn't want to feel that, so I'm like, I'm gonna go get drunk, right? So that was a decision, but 3 years later, after I had made a lot of those decisions, that stuff just happened automatically. Right? And so it wasn't like I was choosing to escape. It was escape was the new default. And this stuff happens without even us like weighing in consciously. It's actually we're gonna get into it. Awesome. Great questions. I feel so good. I'm so much more like an interactive, this like talking at people thing. I hate it. So like the questions are really helpful. So they ground me. So thank you guys. All right, cool. So hopefully that makes sense. So we got the VTA cranked up to 11, which then dumps a ton of dopamine into the nucleus accumbens, which then jackpot, right? And now instead of things just being motivating, they are the most essential thing to survival ever, right? It's like it's a really big experience, which then makes you go a little cuckoo, right? Like instead of just pursuing things, you might like actively chase and chop through doors to try to get things, right? Because now the experience has been turned up, the intensity is turned up. Because when dopamine is in the nucleus accumbens in that amount, the communication that's happening in the brain is that the drug use, and it's artificial, but the brain doesn't know. It just knows, wow, there's a ton of dopamine. That means whatever we're doing must be super important, right? And that's the reward system. Is dopamine means something's good for survival, right? So it's like the brain trusts its own communication, but when we come in and we take a drug that floods the dopamine, the brain's own communication is what gets like taken advantage of and then creates this loop. So hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, and and then after a while, I told you it's multi-generational. We're gonna get a life alert, help I've fallen and I can't get up, as well as Sabrina Carpenter. Um, yeah. So after a while of this like slamming the VTA with the drug and then it being flooded, right? The nucleus accumbens being flooded. After a while, the nucleus accumbens can't hang anymore. So the technical term is it down regulates. So instead of having like 20 or 100 openings for dopamine to come in and do its thing, the nucleus accumbens adapts, and now it's only got like 4 ports, right? So there's less receptors, and also there's less sensitivity, which now means that there's going to be less dopamine working in the system, which creates a whole nother problem, right? But the nucleus accumbens essentially has to adapt because it can't keep hanging with dopamine dumps like this. Hopefully that makes sense. It's like if you got a boss that just gives you like way too much work to do, and you do your best to do it all, and then you get burnt out, and then you're like, screw this, I'm only doing 3 things, and I'm leaving early. Like that's what the nucleus accumbens does. It's like, nah, we're not doing this anymore. This is bullshit. And so it doesn't close, but it downregulates significantly, and then that results in like less dopamine being received and then used by the system. Which, when there's not a lot of dopamine going on, that's when we move into things like anhedonia or loss of pleasure, right? Like things feel flat, which then makes us want to reach for stuff that, right? We want to swing for home runs when we're feeling flat, which again starts to loop this behavior. All right, so this is your brain on drugs. Shout out to the frying pan commercials back in the day. It's so nice to have a better understanding of what addiction is. And also shout out to all the harm reduction people. Love y'all. So nice to have multiple options and entry points too. Because I feel like addiction is just nasty. And it gets nastier. So like we need as many entry points and as many pathways as possible for folks to come out of the funk. So all right, so here's an example we'll walk through when it comes to drugs. So you take a dose of a drug and it might make you feel good, right? Like opiates, kind of get some happy going on. With cocaine, there's some pleasure, right? With alcohol, there's also really alcohol is like feel good by stopping things, whereas like other drugs are like feel good by turning things on. Right? Like everything works a little different, but there's a little bit of feel good. But there's also this artificial stimulation of the VTA, which then causes the dopamine flood. And this is what really screws us up, or this is what really like hijacks the brain. Is that now with a ton of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens, the brain is like, oh man, this must be super important because there's so much dopamine. We really need to do this. This is super essential. And this is happening right below conscious awareness. Right? This is the brain talking to itself. So when you get flooded with dopamine like that, the NAC or the nucleus accumbens lights up super hard. And we start to think this is everything. This is super important. And this is how like drugs or alcohol or your, addictive behavior literally starts to get put into the pantheon with food and water and sex, right? Like basic needs for life. Now all of a sudden your drug is like up in there with that. And so when people are detoxing or don't have the substance and they say they feel like they're dying, like this is what they're up against. Is the system literally thinks that this substance is essential for survival. So when you don't have it, the messaging is like, oh, we're dying. This is bad. It's not just they're a knucklehead and like, don't think about the consequences. I mean, they might not do that too, but there's something deeper going on that you can't just like think your way out of. And then your PFC that could overrule stuff, it's got no shot. It's got no chance against a huge dopamine dump. Like it's too essential for survival to listen to like your logical thought process. And so, yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Kathy. Oh, gotta unmute you.
Unmute. Sorry. He was waiting for me. Just a quick question. Is there a way you can turn that off?
Yep.
No.
Yep. It's recovery.
No, but I know. So I'm here for my son, and it's just like, is there a magic pill that can just shut that off?
No. Well, looking for a magic pill is what gets us in trouble in the first place. But
true.
But,
true is.
Yeah. So what I would say, Kathy, as you're listening, yeah, like expand, like there's going to be feelings there, but like try to expand to understand as much as possible about what's going on that isn't potentially like his choice, his volition,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And then that'll allow you to show up with a little bit more compassion, a little more patience when he's doing silly things, right? But you understand it's like, oh shit, like this is because his brain's a little like off, right? But it can be changed, right? Like everything, again, like we said before, nothing's permanent. So
Okay. That's
so yeah,
that's a really
there's
good
not
thing for me to know that his brain is not permanently.
no, no, no.
All right,
It's
thank you.
like, if you eat crappy for a while and don't go to the gym, things get a little sloppy and messy. And and so like I mean, I guess now there's Ozempic or one of those things, but there's not really one of those for addiction. You got to like get back to the gym, and yeah, and we'll talk about kind of solution oriented stuff at the end. I don't just tell you a bunch of wild stuff and then not give you some solutions. All right, awesome, thank you, Kathy.
We got
I see
Jesse.
Jesse.
Yep.
Yep, come on in.
Uh, Thank you. There are people who take addictive drugs and experience that euphoria, but don't lose their sense of judgment and can go weeks without using again and just don't develop a chaotic drug use problem. In fact, the majority of addictive drugs are used in that fashion, as is alcohol. So
Yep.
I'm not disagreeing with anything you've said. I think it's great. But except for we're skipping over the fact that that initial euphoria isn't necessarily the beginning of the road to hell.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, so like addiction usually before it's ever called addiction, it's like a really effective coping mechanism for something else, right?
It
So
may never
like
turn into addiction. It's just
absolutely,
yeah.
yep. Yeah. Some people can use, and it might mess with your brain a little bit, or you just have cool experiences and you keep it moving. Um, because every brain's different. Some brains learn this much quicker, and some brains learn this much quicker because they're being fueled by like stuff they don't want to deal with, whether it's stress or trauma or significant events, right, or isolation. And we're going to talk a little bit about stress and isolation later. So there are like mitigating factors that definitely make the descent into hell a little bit more likely in some situations than others. But yeah, I mean, I used to tell parents all the time, I'm like, look, if we wanted to give a person addiction, we probably couldn't because there's so many factors that are involved that have to like work almost like it's like a perfect storm to create this. So like, yeah, there's contributing factors. I wouldn't say anything is the cause. And when you have enough contributing factors that come together, then it makes, then it's a recipe that can blow up in maybe an addictive way. But yeah. Like the drugs aren't the evil. It's, the impact that they potentially create for some people, right? That we're really talking about here. Cool. Thanks, Jesse. That was great. Yeah, sometimes we get into like shaming particular substances and then there's like hard drugs versus like soft drugs and what's socially acceptable. But, like really we're talking about brain chemistry and what happens when substances come in, right? Is where our focus should be. And yeah, well, and then I'll save social commentary for later. But all right, so I also just wanted to give you a little example of behaviorally, right? Because substances can be addictive, so can behaviors. Because again, it's about the neurotransmitters, it's about the brain communication. So maybe you're gambling. That was part of my story for a while. So when you place the bet, it's exciting. There's a little bit of dopamine that comes with that, or a lot of it, right? And it's not a natural reward. It's not like this is good for your survival. It's just fun and stimulating and exciting. And so that generates some dopamine. If the dopamine goes, well, when the dopamine goes to nucleus accumbens, there's going to be an increased wanting for that behavior because it lights it up and says this is important. So do this more. Then potentially you win, right? So there's the betting and the possibility. Then there's potentially the winning, which then creates even more of a dopamine download, right? Or a dopamine dump. And now that behavior is reinforced like double time, right? So the bet and then the win, that's a double reinforcement of dopamine, which the more dopamine that's involved, the more your brain thinks it's essential for survival, the more the brain's going to want to go back to that. Cool. Yeah. And your prefrontal cortex can be like, oh, maybe that was lucky. Maybe we should, bet the mortgage. But like, your prefrontal cortex is logic versus your brain's thousands-year-old reward system for survival. The reward system wins. So cool. And so to articulate the brain jack, if you will, we have a super stimulating substance or behavior that skips the line and becomes the top priority, right? So it skips the natural reward process and instead just smashes the VTA, which then releases the dopamine. Because normally, like, there's just a little bit of dopamine that's released for things that you worked hard for. With this, right, with the substance, the behavior, you're hacking the system essentially and smashing the reward button, and then it floods the system. And the messaging again is this is essential to survival. So it's not that it feels good, it's essential to survive, which feels really good when you're surviving, right, as like a living organism. Over time, though, the dumps overload and burn out the reward system, and then the nucleus accumbens down regulates to adjust. That makes sense. Like your boss gives you too much work, so now you're only going to do 3 assignments. But what happens in this case is now you only have a little bit of dopamine in the system, and you only have a little bit of receptors. So the natural rewards like barely show up. Like when you have 100 receptors, a natural reward can hit like 3 or 4, and it's like, oh, okay, that's cool. But when you only have like 4 because the whole system is shut down, that it's like it barely registers. So then with not as much dopamine coming in and not enough dopamine like registering, the brain senses that something's wrong, right? It's like, hey, we're not surviving well because there's not a lot of dopamine, and especially not in the nucleus accumbens, which is all about motivation and doing things that are good. So the brain kicks into a correction mode, right? The brain's so beautiful, so smart. It's like, hey, this is off. All right, let's fix it, right? Just natural adjustments are happening. But the brain's attempt to solve this is like, hey, we need some dopamine. Let's hit the home run. Like, hey, remember when you did the thing that gave us all the dopamine? Do that. Because we're not getting any dopamine right now with like hugs or, showing up to work on time. So we need to hit the home run, go do the big thing, right? Which then reinforces the use. But because the system's still down-regulated, like it doesn't matter. You can keep smashing the dopamine release button, but if there's nowhere for the dopamine to land, then it's not actually like being received by the system and registering as like, oh, cool, this was good. Right? And so this is the conundrum that we get into. This is what happens when the brain adjusts to deal with the flood of dopamine. Is there's a tremendous stimulation, which leads to the flood. Then there's the downregulation, right? Which means dopamine can't actually get in. So then we're not actually meeting the need. So now there's craving for dopamine, which means, hey, go do the thing that brings more dopamine. So then we use again, we hit this, then we flood it. There's more downregulation. And so there's a spiral that happens in the direction of like nothing being good enough. But the nucleus accumbens is still like wanting, needing survival, right? And so this is this like wanting something so bad kind of sensation, but nothing is ever good. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. And this is what happens before it even becomes automatic, right? And like that's something really, to sit with. Like this has already gone off the rails, and this hasn't even become an automatic unconscious behavior yet. And that's what it does, and that's when we really get lost. All right. Oh yeah, it's a habit. We'll talk about that in a second. All right, break slide, deep breaths. I need to drink something because my throat is a little parched. You gotta run to the bathroom, do it. If you got a question, maybe now's a good time. Only like a minute or two, nothing crazy here. Gonna take a deep breath and let our brains exhale. Hey, Claudia, just make sure you hit the unmute button.
Hi. I love your presentation, and I would love to see you in person because I think you are a fun presenter. So having said that, watching and listening to some of the comments in the side and having gone to several of these, I have no degree at all. So I'll preface that. But people are asking, is there a DNA test that you can take to make yourself, find out if you're more susceptible? And it is my understanding, without a degree, that
Mhm.
as you were saying, there are so many different factors involved
Mhm.
that you could take drugs and you're in a great mental state, you've had no trauma in your life, you're living the dream, and you may not get addicted. However, if those things change, so you don't think you're ever going to become an addict, when life starts to take some slides, maybe you're not physically well, and you start taking drugs again, you may be more susceptible because of the physical and mental state that you're in. Is that basically correct?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, anybody can fall into an addictive loop at any point in their life. It doesn't, like, a lot of times, like, in American society, we've had this this wave of like the teens and the 20 nothings that with the opiates. But I mean, the truth is that, yeah, at any point in your life, for any of probably 100 or 1,000 different reasons, you could potentially start living in a way that
Mhm.
hits your nervous system and your brain like this. And then again, anything we practice for a while becomes a habit.
Right.
So all you need to do is something for a regular period of time, and then the brain is designed to take over and automate it. So which can be scary if you're not paying attention to how you're living, but it's also potentially really cool to recognize that the same mechanism here that's a little out of whack that keeps us stuck in addictive patterns, once we understand it and we do some of the work of recovery and healing, we can then start to automate consciously in support of a cool direction in our life. Right. So for me, that's like, addiction is such a teacher. It really shows us so much about ourselves. So yeah, cool. So thank you for
I,
sharing, man.
I just want to comment a
Yep.
little bit about that too. Sorry, my dog is making noise. So I'm going to run around. If I
Yep.
can, real
Yep.
quick. So I tell my peers when I'm working, I'm a peer supporter. I tell peers that I'm working with, it's like we have a blank key when we're born, and there's little notches that kind of go in through that key, and there's a hole where we have to put it to turn on substance use disorder. And so sometimes it takes little things. Sometimes it can be at the beginning of your life or at the end of your life or whenever. But once that key kind of goes in and turns it on, so like trauma can do that, and a death in the family or something like that can be the last notch in that key. You turn it in, you turn it on, and that is like set in to your brain. That's why like some people can go their whole life by using substances, how I can't use substances, so substances in a normal way, and be okay and never have a substance use disorder diagnosis or never have consequences to it. But at least what I've explained to people is it's that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm gonna say something so maybe a little controversial. Like, so there's the belief that, like, once you're a cucumber, right, you can't go back to being a pickle, right? Or, like, once you're cooked, it's kind of it. And for some folks that may be true, and for some folks that's a belief, and so because you believe it, it's true. What we know about the brain is that it's like amazingly the neuroplasticity and the ability to change is there. So like you can change your brain,
Sure.
but like yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'm going to recommend anybody who like did something and it worked out terribly to try that again in the future, no matter how
Right.
much recovery or healing you
Well,
do.
that's
Because
what I mean,
hold
is
on,
that
hold on,
key's
hold on,
on. Oh, sorry.
hold on. Because the neuroscience shows us, right, that once a brain has like learned a particular way to fire and wire, even if you practice a new way for like decades, potentially, like, if you do that old thing once or a couple times, that whole old wiring can come right back online.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
I mean, so maybe it doesn't happen, but that's like a huge roll of the dice with a potentially like fatal, nightmarish kind of possibility. So
Well, yeah, and that's what I mean, is like once the key's on, it doesn't really
yeah,
turn off. We can do the recovery key and try to find all the things that need to help us to
yeah,
stay in a better path or whatever and not have consequences. Some people can use after that. But
right.
what I was saying is like it's once it's on, it's kind of on. Like once we cross that line, if that makes sense, maybe.
So I think that that is a cool metaphor to use. And if it lands with the folks that you're working with, awesome, run with it. And also like something that black and white is really good early.
Mhm.
It's like, hey, look, you crossed the line.
Yeah.
Stuff's going to be weird now, period. Right? And so if you can accept that, then you can build a whole nother life on that. And then maybe 10, 20, 30 years later, there's actually a different understanding that evolves.
Yeah.
But early on, yeah, that's solid. That's a cool metaphor.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Thanks, guys. All right, let's jump into the second part. I'm trying to be time sensitive and I'm having fun too. So then I like don't want to rush, but I also know like y'all got stuff to do. And yeah. Anywho, all right. Part 2, habituated. So just when you thought it was bad, it gets worse. Yeah. Yeah, but to review. So essentially drugs and addictive behaviors hack the reward system. The dopamine dumps, right? Flood, they say this thing is essential and important. Keep doing it. It also burns out the nucleus accumbens. So the nucleus accumbens downregulates. So now you have less dopamine in your system. You have less survival juice in your system, which the brain registers as a problem. Like you need to be motivated to survive, right? Like that's the whole point of the nervous system, really. So the brain attempts to adapt or adjust, and it does that by like, hey, psst, you don't have a lot of dopamine. Remember the thing you did that gives you a lot of dopamine? Go do that again, right? So it's a very functional solution on the inside. On the outside, you're doing the thing that's like burning down everything and hurting people and all that stuff. But on the inside, the brain's like, hey, this thing worked. Go do that again. But because you're downregulated, that old solution actually doesn't work as well. And then so the dopamine remains low. And then a short time later, the brain, it's like the fish in Finding Nemo, was it Dory? Right? It's like 5 seconds later, it's like, we don't have enough dopamine. Go do the thing that gives you dopamine. So you just keep doing it. And then what happens is that pattern of behavior, if you do it enough, then it becomes automated. And it literally leaves the part of your brain that your prefrontal cortex could weigh in on. It leaves and goes to a part of the brain where everything is automated and not even conscious. Right? So then, yeah, it goes from like hell to like more hell, right? As far as getting locked in as a behavior. But again, the cool part is that we can access that and change things, right? So yes, addiction is scary and ugly, but it is reversible, right? Like we can recover. All right, so a brief introduction to this habit engine, the part of the brain that makes things automatic. It's clinically exactly right there where the arrow points, or roughly. And it's called the dorsal striatum. And I don't know, there's no quiz, but that's the name of it. So the dorsal striatum is the area that's responsible for your habits. And Sister Act was a good movie back in the day. And yeah, and so the dorsal striatum is what makes it possible for you to do like simple daily routine things without having to pay attention or really think about it, right? Like brush your teeth while you're thinking about work, tying your shoes while you're, I mean, when was the last time as an adult, like you literally were fully present for the tying of your shoe? All right. Like it just happens while you're doing other things. And even driving to work, right? Like how many of y'all get in the car for work and then all of a sudden you're like at work, you're like, holy shit, like the half-hour commute just like flew by because right? You've done it enough times to where now it's automatic, right? It just happens. And in the dorsal striatum, the way that things become automatic or sequenced is there's cues and there's behaviors, right? And so essentially there's a cue for a behavior, and then that behavior is the cue for the next behavior. And so it becomes this sequence of behaviors that are all cues for the next step. And it just happens. We don't have to think about it, right? Like if you think about, brushing your teeth, like you go into the bathroom and then it's, you grab the toothbrush, maybe you turn the water on, then the toothpaste, like one thing just triggers the next, and then all of a sudden you're washing your mouth out. So the dorsal striatum is actually really cool because if we had to actually be present for everything we do every day, we would be taking naps by lunchtime. Right? Like if you literally had to consciously make all of the decisions from like 8 a.m. to noon, you'd probably collapse. So the dorsal striatum is awesome because it takes repeated behaviors and then makes them automatic and they just run. So it's like on your computer, there's some stuff that just runs in the background automatically. Right? Same thing here, right, with the brain as a computer. Yeah, frees your brain up to do cool stuff or other stuff, and there's not conscious decision making involved now, right? And so like one of the classic examples that comes to mind, like working in treatment forever, is people would just like wind up at liquor stores or just wind up like in neighborhoods they shouldn't be in, right? Like at the set or going to cop substances, and it would just happen. Right. And sometimes people are lying. Sometimes they like, I'm going there and then they're telling you a story. But other times, like, yes, that can actually happen. We have brain science that supports that all you need is like one cue to trigger a sequence of automated behaviors. Right. And so if you've driven to the liquor store enough and it's become an automated behavior, all you need is one cue and then big boom, 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 right? Like 6 things later, you're in the liquor store, like reaching for a bottle. It's like, oh shit, how did I get here? Right. So that's actually a thing that can happen. So throwing that out there. I'm not excusing anybody's behavior, right? But it's literally a thing that can happen. So, if someone, like I was that person too, like, if someone's like crumpled in front of you crying, telling you like, I didn't want to go, it just happened. I don't know how I wound up there. That's real. That's a real experience, which is super terrifying when like you want to do one thing, but your brain has literally been programmed and automated to do something else. So yeah. Hit me in my feels there for a second. All right. Back to the dorsal striatum. So this is the thing to understand about the brain is essentially any repeated behavior. Doesn't matter if it's good, bad, ugly, cool, weird, whatever. If you do it a bunch and you do it consistently, it will become automatic. That's how the brain is designed so that you can keep learning new things and doing cool stuff. And the brain, right, the dorsal striatum takes over for you and keeps things running. And so what happens a lot of times in addiction is in the beginning, again, there's conscious decisions maybe, or there's relief seeking to try to get away from pain that we are aware of or not aware of, or whatever. There's stuff that happens that results in the beginning of a behavior pattern, right? Consecutive choices, consecutive behaviors. And then if we start to do that a lot or consistently, it's only a matter of time before it slips into the dorsal striatum, where then you don't really have like conscious control over it anymore. Right? So be mindful of what you're doing. There's a quote. It's like a choice becomes a behavior a habit a character. I don't know. There's some cool quote that I'm messing up, but that's like literally rooted in neuroscience too. So yeah, and then dopamine reinforcement is going to make anything like it's going to make your brain work better at remembering. It's also going to lock in the patterns even more, right? Like you do something a lot, it's going to lock in. You do something a lot that's also registering as essential for survival, it's really going to lock. Yeah, and then you have essentially a car driving itself. All right, cool. So this is another shout out to Dr. Abrams. She would always do the shower habit thing. Like this was her example of when I talked about the toothpaste before. So I'm going to run through it because I think it's helpful. Also as a shout out to her. And whenever she would do this, I would always, she would do it in a way that's like totally PG. I would always try to be cheeky and heckle her. But yeah, but this is how she saw it and understand it, which I think is really clear and really cool. So her shower habit, and I think most of us can relate, right? And this is understanding like behaviors and cues in automation. So we get into the shower, or we turn on the water, then we get in the shower. Hold on. We turn on the water, then we get ready, then we get in. When was the last time anybody just got in the shower, like fully dressed and then turned on the water, right? Like that doesn't happen because we have a sequence. We've done it for a while. So water's on, clothes off, in the shower. Maybe we rinse, then shampoo, then rinse, then condition, rinse, then maybe argue about which is better, shampoo or conditioner. Shout out to all my 80s and 90s kids. Then we soap the body, rinse, then the face, rinse. And I don't know about y'all. I do my face first and then the body, but apparently she does body and then face. I thought you're supposed to work top down in the shower. That's how you clean. You clean from the top down. You don't do your body and then your face. Anyway, it's her slide. So, Yeah, and then your final rinse, and then you turn off the water, right? And then as a result, you are so fresh and so clean. So there's your shower habit. And most of us go through this again, this process. We might literally like go into the bathroom and turn on the shower and then be totally lost in thought about anything and everything else until we're turning off the water and grabbing the towel, right? Because it can all happen automatically. Sometimes what happens though is there's a little hiccup in the giddy up. Right? So if you notice here, we have an initial rinse, we have rinsing the hair, after the shampoo, then after the conditioner, then after the soap, then the face too, and the final. And so, like I was talking before, the whole part of the automation is cue behavior. And essentially a behavior becomes a cue for the next behavior. So the rinse is a behavior that potentially could cue shampoo or conditioner or soap or wash your face or get out. Right? And so sometimes, because the brain isn't perfect all the time, sometimes there's a hiccup in the giddy up. And so you might get into the shower and like skip the shampoo, and all of a sudden you're conditioning. You're like, why did I do that? That's weird. Well, because there's the potential for that cue to go that way. Also, sometimes we do the shampoo and then go right to the body, and we get out, and it's hours later, and you're like, oh, holy shit, I didn't condition my hair, right? Because the cue skipped. So these are things that are practiced, but there's hiccups in the giddy up, and so because they're automated and there's not like a decision making going on, sometimes they can just kind of like bop around, and and so that's why we can wind up like potentially getting out of the shower with like our hair all still fully, like shampooed or whatever, or any other kind of automated behavior. Like sometimes, like you're driving home a certain way, and or you're going to work and you just go to Dunkin' Donuts even though you already made coffee at home, right? Because you're just used to like making that turn, doing that thing, right? Like getting in the car, starting the car, driving the car. Those are all behaviors that then cue the next behavior in the sequence. So that's how the brain works, which is actually pretty cool. But when you get something like addiction in there at that level, then it becomes super problematic. So hopefully that makes sense. I feel like she did that slide so much better. Yeah. Shout out. Moment of silence for Lisa. I mean, she's still awesome, and she's at Rowan. But anyway, she's like too fancy now. Back in the day, we were both young and new. Now she's like important stuff and multiple promotions. Anywho, all right, addiction and cues. So this is cool to understand, right? We have the initial experience of taking the drug or engaging in the behavior, and that lights us up with dopamine, which says this is important, keep doing this a lot. And what also happens in that moment of the dopamine being released, everything gets tagged as important, right? It's like this moment is super important. Now, again, like all you did was a drug, which smacked the VTA and released dopamine, but the brain doesn't know, right? So the flood of dopamine just tells the brain everything is important right now. So it takes a snapshot, and that includes sounds, smells, sights, peoples, places, things, right? External stuff as well as internal stuff as well. Like there's a snapshot of the whole moment that's taken. And there's another part of the brain that's involved here, but we won't go there. But dopamine tags everything as important and part of this super essential experience, which, I mean, makes sense. Like if you did something that was actually really important for you, you'd really know everything that was involved. The only problem is the next time any of those things show up, right, they're potentially a cue back into the using behavior, right? So literally you show up to like this similar song plays, or you see a person, or you have a certain feeling. And if that was part of what was tagged as really important the last time you used and the dopamine was everywhere, the brain will be like, ooh, I know what that smell is, right? Like it's catching a whiff of the old experience. And so that little thing can now become the cue to engage in the behavior. And when it's early, that can happen, right, with some conscious participation. But once it gets into the dorsal striatum, the cue sets off an automated sequence. So that's how, like, literally you could be somewhere and like a song or a smell, and then all of a sudden you're like using and don't even know how you got there because the whole thing went automated. And so, yeah. And it's like a classic in recovery, they talk about I see your hand. I'm gonna come to you in a second, Jacob. in recovery, they talk about if you go to the barbershop enough, you'll get a haircut. And yeah, and what I would say is if you've gone to the barbershop, that barbershop, a lot of times and always gotten a haircut, yes, then you've reinforced a pattern of behavior that has consecutive cues, right? It has this like behavior sequencing or linking. And so then potentially walking into that barbershop, just the smell of the barbershop or the sight of the like hair on the floor or whatever it is could immediately, next thing you know, you're like sitting in the chair with the cape on and somebody's buzzing your head. Like, whoa, how did that happen? It's because of the way that the brain is designed. All right, cool. Yeah, Jacob, what do you got?
Would you call that, Drew? Would you call that those cues? Would you call that triggers?
Yeah,
Trigger.
you could. Yeah, I mean, I'm not. Yeah, I guess. A cue is more like the behavioral psych kind of terminology. I think in the addiction world or the treatment world, we might say triggers, like things trigger us. So there's some kind of stimulation from the outside or the inside. That's the other thing. Like you could be literally triggered or stimulated or cued by your own emotional state, right? Which is wild to think, because now it's not just people, places, and things. It's like my own emotions and thoughts. But yeah, anything shows up, it potentially triggers the first behavior in a sequence that's automated, and then it just ping, 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 ping. The dominoes just fall, do, 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 and then you go. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. All right. Yeah, use trigger if you want. I mean, other people you might be like, oh no, trigger means this. Yeah, okay, cool. Like, I'm just using words for this particular articulation, of this kind of dynamic. So, if trigger means something else to do, that's cool, but it could definitely be used in this context. Yeah. Yeah, and so essentially the cue then lights up the brain to it remembers the drug, and so then we go chase the drug. But what happens with time in a brain that's been in addiction? Again, this is like wild. So the drug cue actually starts to light up the brain more than the drug itself. Right? So on the left, that's a brain that just got a cue about drug use, lit up like a Christmas tree. But then that same brain, when you go do the drug later, right? Like when that automated behavior sequence plays out and then you're using, that's then how much stimulation you get from the drug itself. So essentially the brain literally starts to get addicted to cues. And so for me personally, the way I understood this, I was trying to quit smoking while we were doing the presentations. And one day it just hit me like a lightning bolt. I was present, I was aware, I was noticing my experience. And I realized that the feeling that I got in my system when I wanted a cigarette was so much more intense than anything I ever got once I actually smoked a cigarette. Right? Like I had quit dozens of times and I'd be quit for, an hour or a day or a week. And the idea of the cigarette was like, whoa, right? Like the smell or the idea, whatever the cue. But then once I smoked a cigarette, it was like, this sucks. This isn't what I thought it was going to be, right? And essentially that's what I'm describing is this is how the brain fires. The cue becomes stronger than the drug itself. And so now you don't have somebody that's like addicted to the substance or just, they might be physiologically dependent on the substance, but now the brain is actually getting more of a dopamine hit from the things related to the drug. Which now instead of having one problem issue, now there's like potentially dozens of things that are related that could be considered cues that will light up the brain more than the drug. So hopefully that lands and makes sense.
It makes sense. Like I was just thinking about like how when I wake up in the morning and I start thinking about like I could just lie there forever, but the second I start thinking about coffee, like my body is up and I'm going to get coffee. So like that cue like is more powerful than me just like drinking a cup of coffee, and so that coffee is a habit as a result of that cue.
You got it. Well said. Cool. So hopefully this is giving insight. Like there's a whole lot going on in the brain of some, like, we'll say like this, there's a whole lot going on in our brain all the time we're not aware of, but also when it comes to addiction. So it's not just the surface level person being a knucklehead. Like there's a lot of stuff going on. All right. If we run a little long, Aaron, is that the end of the world?
No, just go.
Okay. All right. If you got to tap out, folks, I get it. It's cool. But I got juicy stuff I got to get to. All right. So Alexander's Rat Park. So this has become more well known, definitely over the last 10 years. Right. So this is the like, you give rats water or morphine water or cocaine water. And the original study in the 60s, they were isolated rats, and those rats chose the morphine water almost all the time, often to the point of death. Right. And so the initial interpretation was like, oh, like drugs are bad. Like it was a very like old, archaic type of understand. But then the research jumped the next decade in which Alexander introduced, instead of having rats be isolated, he gave them an enriched environment. So it had like toys and tunnels and other rats to play with, and space to explore, and like just like fun rat shit to do. Right. And when you give that kind of enriched environment, the rats don't choose the morphine water hardly at all, right? Because they're getting their happy juices, they're getting their dopamine and their stimulation from their environment and from connection. So they don't need to go to the drug for the stimulation, which is cool. The other thing that's really cool about this is that even rats that previously were addicted in isolation, when you take them and you put them in the rat park, they recover and they start to reduce or totally stop using the morphine water. Right? Like to me, this is so like this is recovery. Like if you give somebody like something to actually live for and connection and support, like yeah, the drugs become very they're not as attractive because you're getting your juice elsewhere. The other thing that's connected to this a lot is there's study and research done on the vets coming back from Vietnam. And so when the military were serving in Vietnam, there was tremendous opiate use, right? I mean, like all the heroin's right there. So they were using it a lot, and they're at war, trauma, like all of it makes sense. The vast majority of folks that came back dropped the opiate habit upon return. No treatment, no like nothing special, nothing fancy. And so that also kind of challenged the drug piece, right? That like, oh, just drugs are super addictive. It also supported like, hey, when you change your scene, your environment, right, it gives you the opportunity to then engage life differently. And so environment plays a huge part. That being said, just because you move somewhere else doesn't mean it's going to be all brand new, right? But moving into a different environment that then stimulates and supports you in different ways, it's a hell of a great thing to include in a recipe of trying to do something different, right? So the geographical relocation change won't like fix things, but it can be a really cool part of an equation towards recovery. Sweet. Because yeah, addiction isn't just about the drug, environment, social context, and unmet needs all play roles as well. Like we were talking about before, because you can, 100 people use a substance and only so many actually wind up in addiction for a variety of reasons. And these are some of those additional mitigating factors, if you will. Sweet. Shout out to the rats. We got to give more love to the rats, man. Like there's so much cool science that's because of rats. Anywho. Last piece. I think this is the last piece for the second. Social isolation in the brain. So isolation is not good for the brain. Essentially what happens is if you're not getting your juices outwardly, you then will get them inwardly through routines and patterns. And so isolation actually leads towards like a weaker response to natural rewards because you're not really getting stimulated. You're not getting the connection or the interaction. So you're not getting healthy rewards, which then means the brain's going to look to hit home runs, right, and go for the big dopamine dump behaviors. Also in isolation, the amygdala, which is a part of the brain that deals with fear and emotional reactivity, that gets all wacky, right? It gets increased activity. And also stress hormones are produced in greater fashion in isolation. So the brain becomes dysregulated and like needs relief from that state, which then also makes dopamine dumping behaviors super sexy. And yeah, and really like we're wired to be social creatures. Like it's in our brain wiring, it's in our, our biology, our chemistry. And essentially, yeah, if we're not getting connection, if we're not being a part of, yeah, we'll look elsewhere to feel good. And so instead of like having real, authentic, rewarding connections with people, if that's not available, because we're alone or because we feel alone or, whatever the scenario is, then we'll go to behaviors that will artificially produce the brain chemicals that we need. And then we get stuck in meeting our needs that way. So that's there. And I'm going to say this, and this will be a little cliffhanger before we go to the next part. So connection is definitely part of the equation, connection, disconnection, but connection isn't the opposite of addiction, according to me. And I'll give you more on that in just a few seconds after the break. The last section is not long. So where are we at? Yeah, I need maybe 6-7 minutes tops.
Yeah, Kathy's got a question, and then we'll just go right through.
So I
Awesome.
just, when you talk about isolation, my son is homeless and he lives in the woods. But he seems to be pretty content out there. And when you say that isolation can be a bad thing, it's like, oh no.
So
I mean, there are other people around,
Mhm.
it's not like he's totally isolated. He does go into town and go to the soup kitchen and all that, but you're making me more scared now.
Well, so your feelings are your responsibility.
Right.
As a recovering codependent, we'll just say that. Also, yeah, I mean, essentially, if you're not getting your needs met in one place, you'll get them met elsewhere. And so with this, essentially, if you're in social isolation, if you're not meeting your needs through social interactions, then you'll meet them through it's your behavior loops, your behavior patterns, and then potentially like using different things. So like if somebody's getting all of their dopamine produced through substance using, then you don't really need to go do all the other bullshit, right? Like it's very similar to what happens with pornography addiction, right? Like if you're getting certain needs met through the pornography use, then it's actually going to inhibit or impact the way that you socially interact or date or not date, right? So yeah, I wouldn't say anything's like bad or terrible. Like it's just everything has facets to it, and then it's all interconnected. So
Okay, thank you.
yeah, absolutely. Cool. All right, one more deep breath, and then we'll dive in to the good part. We talked about how funky and awful this can be, and what's going on, and hopefully some of the insight here, allows you to take a deep breath and almost like let go a little bit of trying to like make it all fit with what you knew, right? Hopefully new knowledge is then allowing you to approach things differently in a way that's a little more peace or space or understanding, because that'll actually help. And we'll talk about co-regulation here in a second as well. All right, so the healing component. So we'll kick it off. Opposite of addiction. So the opposite of addiction is connection is a commonly liked and repeated statement by this guy, Johan Hari. He did a TED Talk back in the day. And it's a super cool TED Talk. I would encourage you guys to check it out. It talks about really how belonging is a huge component of the recovery process, right, from addiction. And how isolation and belonging. But while it's a powerful ideal, it's not the whole story, right? So like connection is not the only thing, right? Because addiction isn't just isolation. Addiction it flourishes in isolation, but it's also like automated unconscious behavior patterns, right? And so like connection is cool, but there's got to be more than that. Because in addiction, like I said, we're definitely disconnected from others, but really when we're like in the grips, we're disconnected from ourselves as well. Our bodies, our breath, our feelings, our choices, parts of ourselves. We're also disconnected from the present moment, right? Living in the traumas of the past or the fears of the future, right? So I think disconnection is definitely part or like at the heart of addiction. What I would offer is that the opposite of addiction is actually presence, right? And again, whether you agree or disagree, that's cool. But just for food for thought is when we're talking about addiction, we're talking about automated behavior that is happening at like unconscious or subconscious levels, right? And so in order to actually like rewire, we have to show up for what's happening in the moment, right? And so presence for me is very much like being in the moment, being with yourself, being with all parts of yourself, And then also when we show up fully in the moment, we're actually able to connect with others as well. Right? So I would offer that presence is actually the opposite of addiction, or the antidote, if you will. So like if you want to come out of addiction, you have to incorporate more presence, more showing up for yourself in the here and now with whatever's happening, with the other beings that are also here. That should be part of the equation. And we see it also in different approaches to healing and counseling, like exposure therapy or EMDR. So yeah, so the more you get present, the more you're stepping out of, these loops that can be challenging. And so how might one get present? Well, lucky for you, I have a 3-part recipe. Shout out to the rats again, apparently. Yeah, I would say 3 main ingredients help you get present. It's mindfulness, community, purpose, and service, right? And so this is all rooted in the neuroscience as far as how it helps us heal. So mindfulness, specifically mindfulness meditation, but mindfulness isn't just a meditation thing. It's literally how we do stuff. It's an approach where we're present, we're not judgmental, right? And what we find through the research is that even like a short 8-week course results in the brain getting bigger, thicker, and better at doing what it does, right? So there's increased brain thickness, like literally practicing meditation is like doing reps and your muscle gets bigger in your brain, right? Which is super helpful. And it does it in parts of your brain that are actually weakened by the addictive loops. So it's like hitting the gym for the parts of your brain that, have been atrophied while you're in an addictive loop. It also decreases activation in the amygdala, right? So this is emotional reactivity and fear. So less reactivity here is super cool because then you're not freaking out as much, or you're not having as big of an emotional response in situations. And then, like I said, you're strengthening centers. You're also strengthening the way the centers talk to each other in your brain. So mindfulness, super cool, multiple ways. It doesn't just have to be meditation. It can be yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong or a gabillion other things. It could just be paying attention to folding your laundry a little bit more instead of, listening to what your brain's yapping about. Yeah, mindfulness is like hitting the gym for your brain. It'll pump you up. Hans and Franz. Anywho. Also, community. Great TV show, but in this case, community also helps us heal. The main thing here, co-regulation, which is kind of like the staple of any like conscious parenting kind of approach, right? Is understanding that a regulated nervous system is what regulates a dysregulated nervous system, right? If someone's spinning out and freaking out, you spinning out and freaking out about it doesn't help, right? Like if someone's spun and you start spinning, everybody's spun. But if we can learn how to co-regulate, right? If we can stay regulated ourselves, then we can bring a calm energy, and then it gives the spin a chance to die down, right? And so that's what happens in recovery. One of the phrases I love is like, we're not all crazy at the same time, right? Because everybody's a little crazy in recovery, and everybody like takes their turn getting spun out about something. But if you have a community, or you have people, or your sponsor, or your counselor, whoever, you have somebody that you can come back to who you can co-regulate with, right? Who's not going to spin with you, but like hold space while your spin dies down, then you can come back to sanity. And so, and having a community of people is great, because then you can, but like 10 people's co-regulation is going to impact one person way cooler than one person's co-regulation. So co-regulation is a neuroscience reason to connect with people. And it's also important to say it's like safe social interaction, right? Which can be conveyed through eye contact, voice, facial expressions, right? That will calm the nervous system. Not just anybody, but like safe people that feel safe. And so you got to practice a little trust in the healing and the recovery process. And then also these kind of relationships stimulate oxytocin, which is a super cool brain juice that does stuff like reduce stress and enhance feelings of safety and trust. It also increases connection and emotional bonding and openness. Oxytocin is what's produced and flowing between a mother and child. Right? It's also what's produced if you do a hug, and not just like a quick like bro hug. You gotta like get a hug and hold it. I mean, don't get weird. You got to be in between a bro hug and getting weird, but in there, if you hold it for a little bit, oxytocin has a chance to flow and be produced. And then potentially the coolest part is that oxytocin helps support dopamine regulation. So again, remember, like part of what the original problem was is that the dopamine system's totally out of whack. So we need to regulate that. And oxytocin helps with that. And also oxytocin supports neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change. So community co-regulation leading to oxytocin, that's going to be a huge part of the equation as far as healing and recovery. And then the last thing, purpose and service, like doing stuff, getting other-centered, helping folks, which is, commonly suggested and usually a huge part of the recovery process. Like most folks I know that are in healing or recovery, after they get out of the acute, like dumpster fire stage, there's almost always the turn towards helping other people. And it's a beautiful thing, but it's also rooted in neuroscience as part of the ongoing solution. Because it gives you a healthier, sustainable dopamine access, which again helps us re-regulate and retrain the dopamine system that's been out of whack. And so this is how we come back from a hijack, is we practice our way into a more healthy, sustainable dopamine system. It also gives us opportunity to get some prefrontal cortex reps as far as making pro-social choices, which feels good and gives us a little bit of dopamine. There's oxytocin here again, right? Community and connection. And then there's also this thing called the default mode network, which is a part of your brain. And when we're in service, when we're focused externally helping others, it actually, and this is all rooted in science, it shifts the default mode network, or the DMN, and it actually like makes the self-referential brain activity like a little quieter, right? So there's not so much I, me, mine, and there's a little bit more like them and us and we, which yeah, in the recovery process, a lot of people talk about being selfed up or self-absorbed or self-obsessed. And yeah, and that's when the DMN is much more self-referential, but we can shift out of that through purpose and service. Cool. In closing, yeah, addiction hijacks the brain, but it doesn't break it, right? This is not permanent. It's a state. It's not permanent, right? And we can come back. We can recover. We can rewire, regulate, and recover. And yeah, and our ability to recover and heal, like we're going to continue to grow in our effectiveness at doing that, the more we understand what's going on. And so presentations like this, the work of organizations like Mobilize Recovery, right, like all help support reducing stigma, increasing awareness, and then being able to help folks more effectively. Because that was one of the things that was really clear to me at some point, maybe early on. It was like the addiction treatment success number, like it was kind of low. It still is kind of low. And what that always told me is like, all right, if we're not effectively treating this, it means we don't actually understand it. Because if we understand something, then we're able to actually like do the thing. And so continuing to do the science and the work around, understanding addiction and what goes on. Yeah, it's a pretty cool thing to do. The three main ingredients, like I said, mindfulness, community, service, and purpose, like that's your magic pill or your recipe. And you'll find this in most approaches to recovery. And most people who are recovering or healing are doing at least one of these. I would say do all three and see what happens. And then, yeah, last note is we are not our loops. So just because you might have fallen into a loop, or just because a loved one or someone you're working with has fallen into a loop, that's not all that they are, and it's not permanent. And yeah, and we can come out of it too, right? Like recovery is possible. And I would go as far as to say that not only is recovery possible, but with the understanding continuing to increase as far as what's going on in the brain and then the research that's being done, like we're creating a pathway towards recovery that like it's almost inevitable, right? Like it's not just possible, it's inevitable if you move in certain ways that are supported by the science. And I think we have tons of proof all around us. Like there's millions of people that are living in recovery today that have put in work and have learned how to move differently and overcome these loops and patterns, and are such assets to society. So not only is recovery possible, it's very possible and potentially inevitable if you're moving in an informed manner. So, but it also doesn't happen on our timeline either. So practice patience, and yeah, that's it. So goodbye from the bear. And oh yeah, these slides. If you want these slides, you might want to break out your phone for this part of the presentation. There's a couple in a row. So these slides are available. Just do the QR thing. Oh, here you are. do the QR thing with your phone, and then I'll take you to a page on my website, and you can just click the button, and it pops up the PDF. So get your slides here, and yeah, and I moved quickly through the end part. But if you want to have more conversations about that, I'm always around. I'm available. So there's your slides, and also I just put a book out, so I got to give myself a shout out. Talking about the principles of recovery, right? And this isn't like the end all be all, but it's me riffing on my experiences and how I understand some of these principles and the way they show up in a process of healing and recovery. So if you're looking for a recovery flavored summer read, it's only 150 pages. Might make you feel good about yourself. And, yeah, so that's there. And then, yeah, last thing is the survey, which I will turn over to Aaron because he knows those things.
Yeah, no, I just dropped it in the chat. I put it in there a couple times throughout the presentation. And Drew, thank you so much. I was thinking about a friend of mine that had gone into treatment a while back, and he's feeling lost in there. And then he's like, he sat down with somebody that was able to just like tell him what was going on with his brain, or like why he behaves the way he does, or like the neuroscience piece like fascinates me, and so I think that. And again, I've seen this presentation like a handful of times over the years, and I liked all the additions in it. I don't know if you want to stick around for questions. I'm gonna pause I'm gonna hit the where's the let's see here. Good night, everybody. I'm just saying that for the stopping the recording piece.